You know when animals are the most adorable? When we see them animated on TV and the movies. Now a new animation from PETA hopes to jar your senses about mice when they're plucked to be used for experiments. It's animation as the road to empathy to help you understand the little guy perspective of a laboratory mouse. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, a new PETA animation is coming to your town to help you see that lab mice have feelings too.
Shifting that perspective so we're not seeing ourselves as the human, but seeing what it is to be that victim, the mouse, is really powerful. So I'm excited for this video and excited for the possibility of opening people's eyes to what it is that we're doing when we use animals in laboratories.
More with PETA VP Dr. Alka Chandna, but first, thanks again for joining us here at the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with friends. Let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. And if you've just found us, welcome. And keep binging. There's lots to listen to on the PETA Podcast. Your questions on veganism? Episode 79. Hear all our frank conversations with PETA founder Ingrid Newkirk. And another horse died recently at Santa Anita, but PETA is spurring real action thanks to PETA's Whistleblower Network. Find out more on episode 87. It's all available 24/7 wherever you catch your podcasts. Now, if you really want to help the animals, you can always hit the Donate Now button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. A new animation is up at PETA.org, and it's going to be on TV also in markets like New York, Boston, Raleigh, North Carolina, wherever vivisectors are. That's where you can see the story of a young mouse going to school to learn lab science. I talked to Dr. Alka Chandna, PETA VP in the Laboratory Investigation Department, about the power of animation to increase our empathy on the PETA Podcast.
PETA has been working with this ad agency, and people can see it up there on PETA.org. It's an ad. It's a TV commercial. And then PETA is known for doing TV commercials in the past. Tell me about this one and describe it for our listeners.
Well, it looks like a Pixar video, one of these videos made for children of all ages. That's fun for the family, really beautiful. What you see is a mouse in a forest setting. The mouse is wearing a backpack, and he's scurrying along on the forest floor. And it's just beautiful the way a lot of these Pixar movies are just sumptuous to take in. Just a beautiful view. And you see him jump down into an opening at the base of a tree, and he scurries into a classroom. He was late for his class, and the teacher is at the front, the professor is at the front. It's a chemistry class. The teacher smiles at him knowingly, and he smiles back, and they're having their lesson, and it's all really adorable, with all of the students there wearing their lab coats, getting ready to mix chemicals, and all very excited about learning. Then what you see is a human hand come down, remove the facade, and it ends up that these are not, in fact, mice who are experimenting, but rather mice who are being used for experimentation. You then see the hero, the protagonist of this short advertisement, being lifted up by his tail. He's terrified, and you know that bad is going to come to him. So it's a really emotionally compelling video, but it's done in a way that people wouldn't turn away. When we look at video footage of what happens to mice and rats and of course all other animals in laboratories. We see invasive experiments, massive tumors on these poor animals, the animals being used in experimental surgeries, the animals suffering in all manner of ways. Somebody forgets to give them water and they've dehydrated to death. Somebody messes up and as a result, the water that's supposed to go to the cage for drinking floods the cage, and you see the animals in distress and possibly even dead from drowning. These are the images that we see every single day of animals, mice, rats in laboratories, and just the absolute horror show, the unending horror show of their lives, the misery, the pain. But we know that people don't want to see that. People turn away, they close their eyes, and as a result, the animal stories never get told. Using this very sweet, visually appealing advertisement, our hope is that it will open people's eyes to a very grim reality and encourage them to act on behalf of these poor animals.
Yeah, when I saw that and I see the mouse running, I wasn't sure. I thought, and the backpack was a giveaway. Oh, he's going to school. The mouse is going to school. and then he's in a chemistry class and they are doing their lab experiments. And so, and there's no voices. I mean, you don't have a voiceover artist talking like a mouse. It's all mimed, or it's all, you just see their actions, and up comes a graphic, sort of like in a silent film, where it says, "Here are animals experimenting, and animals experimenting are cute." And so, we know that, oh yeah, okay, it's funny. And then we get disrupted because there's this hand coming down and the mice are being taken away. So it is emotional at that point. And so after the sign that says animals experimenting are cute, then comes up the sign, and really the point, experimenting on animals isn't. I guess that's the message, huh?
Exactly. And, up to the point where the hand comes down and the whole tenor of the video changes dramatically, up to that point, what we're watching could pass for a Pixar film. And I've got to confess, I'm in my late 50s now, but in spite of that, I'm a sucker for Pixar movies. I just love the animation. I love the stories. I love the characters. And that's what you get in spades with this new video from PETA. Because as you say, there are no voiceovers, but there's so much emotion and there's a lot of communication. You see it in the faces, you see it in the relationships that are clear. And so up to the point where the hand comes in, the human hand comes in, what we're seeing is mice, enjoying each other's company, which is something that we know from, ethologists, animal ethologists to be true. They love their families. They love to be with one another. They enjoy their lives. They love to learn. That's also a big part of who mice are. They're very smart, and they enjoy all of that. So everything up to where the human hand comes in, there are no, there's no language per se, as far as, people speaking English or some other human language, but you see a lot of communication, a lot of nonverbal, interaction going on. And it's just really beautiful. And I think, we at PETA, often we'll talk about the specifics of what happens in laboratories and the extent to which pain relief, for example, is not provided to these animals, even though they're mammals and they feel pain and they suffer. So we'll talk about the tumor studies, or we'll talk about how they're used in wound studies where, experimenters deliberately inflict wounds on them. We talk about how they're used in toxicity studies. And so they're force-fed chemicals and pharmaceutical drugs and, all manner of things, household products, personal care products. So we talk about that. So we talk about the horrors. But we don't, I feel, talk enough And this video hopes to address, part of this, that we don't talk enough about who these animals are, and the fact that at the end of the day, it's not just the experiments that are the problem. It's the fact that we use these animals for our own ends when they have their own lives and they have their own agenda.
They go to school and go to chemistry class, clearly.
Right.
But that's an excellent point that you make, that most people, when they hear about vivisection or anti-vivisection, they'll see these horrible images and it makes people look away. It makes people feel bad. And we don't balance it out with the things that make the animals real, that make the animals, what they are. They're members of the life community out there,
That's a really nice way to put it. And that's exactly right. They are members of the life community and they are, sentient animals, sentient members of the life community, who have their relationships with their families. And mouse mothers are extremely loving. They'll put themselves in harm's way to protect their offspring, to protect their sons and daughters, their babies. They do. There's a lot of learning that goes on. And, sometimes actually when we talk about what happens in laboratories, we point out that young mice, baby mice, are actually taken away from their mothers too early. And as a result of that, they don't learn things about social cues. Anybody who has spent any time in a laboratory or looked at what happens in laboratories knows that there is a big issue with the fact that mice are confined in what are essentially shoebox cages. That's what the cages look like. They're basically the size of a shoebox. And that's where about 5 mice are held. It's a sort of a plastic contraption, and these mice are trapped there. And if there's any kind of conflict between the mice, well, they can't get away. They're trapped in there. And the thing is that, obviously, like just as with humans, there can be scuffles, between different parties, and those scuffles can become violent. The thing is that mice, when there are such scuffles, in the wild, they have certain cues that they offer. They might, move their head in a certain way or move their whiskers in a certain way. And that signals to the other mouse, okay, I surrender, you're the top dog here. And it's sort of a placating motion to indicate, okay, we're done. I'm not going to fight you anymore. But because these young mice are taken away from their mothers so early, they never learn the social cues. That learning is robbed of them. And consequently, when there are scuffles, fights in mouse cages, they become lethal because these young mice don't know how to recognize social cues. So, everything about their social structure is totally frustrated. They're taken away from their moms too young. They don't know how to be mice. They don't recognize how to communicate with one another. And they're in this foreign environment where everything is artificial. They have nothing that would make their lives worth living. And, everything of their agenda, what they want to do with their lives, what they would like to spend their time doing, even basic choices are just taken away from them.
I guess this is true with any type of program or cartoon or animation that features animals instead of humans. I mean, it makes us see animals in a totally different way. It makes them human, which, they're not human. We know that. And I guess that's one of the things. If you don't see them as human, then I guess they're subhuman and you can do anything you want to them, including experiment on them. But when you give them these human traits, I mean, and you can go back to animation stories in history, go back to Bambi, 101 Dalmatians.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
Well, the Dalmatians aren't human there, but I guess they are. They talk to each other. The humans don't know, but this is the power of animation. So it was kind of ingenious. And once again, we must note that You mentioned Pixar, but this wasn't a Pixar project. It looks like Pixar.
Yeah, it has the look and feel of a Pixar for sure. The colors, the way the animals are represented. And I'm just going to push back a tiny bit, Emil, to say that I think what the animations do isn't so much imbue the animals with human qualities. It decodes who the animals already are so that we can understand them. You know, it's sort of like an interpretation. It's basically interpreting for us who they are so that we can get beyond our inabilities to see animals for who they are. So, you know, when we say, I mean, you know, you're making these jokes about the animals being in the chemistry classroom. And obviously, you know, mice are not learning chemistry, but mice are learning. You know, so that fundamental aspect is true. So mice may not be schoolmates the way that, you know, when I was a child, I had schoolmates, and your children have had schoolmates, not like that, but they have friends, right? You know, and that might be siblings. And then it's also, you know, their larger community of friends. And so, essentially what these animated movies do, as far as I'm concerned, you know, from my perspective, is that they sort of pull back this prejudice that we tend to have about the other animals, where we don't see them as individuals, even though they are individuals. You know, we tend to see them as blocks and as each one not necessarily being important. But then when we see that they are individuals with interests, you know, and that's just a scientific fact that they're individuals with interests, then we can start to understand that what happens to them matters. So I think that these, you know, this new ad that PETA's produced, in association with the group that made the video, you know, I think what these ads really do is help us get out of our encumbrances, you know, remove the blinders that we have as human beings, where we only understand, you know, sometimes only English.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you know what it does? It really opens up the imagination. If you're so constricted in your view of what an animal is, and, you know, and you see the humans as, you know, dominant in the animal kingdom, but here is this view that gives you this world where you have to consider that, okay, here's this mouse, and he's going to chemistry class, and he's experimenting. he's doing his lab experiments, and, you know, and you, it sort of jostles you to see it in a different way. And then again, you're jostled back when you see that hand come down to reach down to get the mouse and pull him into an experiment. So in a short little vignette, in an ad form, in an animated ad form, it really is a powerful message and almost positive. Well, with all the emotion that those documentary type of images that you see, you know, on a regular basis of experimentation. You know, it's just as powerful as that, and on both a positive and a negative end. It makes you think about what goes on in animal experimentation.
Right. I absolutely agree with you, Emil. And, you know, one of the things that what you just said, you know, really made me think about was, it's perspective, right? That we sometimes will think about, in a laboratory, you know, we might have more connection with the human being in the laboratory because they're human and we're human. But what if we were to reverse that? What if we were to think about the animals in the laboratory and take their perspective?
Right.
In fact, there's like a really interesting video, and we used to have it on our website. And I think if people search, they might still find it. But I think it was a German videographer who did this video of what it would be like to be a rabbit in a cage in a laboratory. And it's really jarring, you know, to use your word, which I think is perfect, because you feel what it's like to have your whole world, you know, just narrowed down and confined to this small little cage that's just a little bit bigger than your body. And, when rabbits are in these cages, they can only see in one direction, the front of their cage. Everything else is closed off. And I think that we might, when, all the hundreds of hours of video footage that I've personally watched of rabbits in cages, I'm still a human being and I'm just watching them, as an outsider. But I think it takes this extra dimension of empathy to imagine what it's like to be in that cage and to stay in that cage and what that world would look like. And sometimes video can really help. I mean, I'm a huge movie buff. I mean, that's my favorite thing in the whole world to do is watch movies. But, I just see the power of film to really help us, connect the dots, to sort of bridge the gap, and to experience, try to imagine the experience of these other animals. So with, going back to this mouse lab, we think about, there's that mouse, that protagonist, that boy, the boy mouse who is late for his class and, he's mischievous and but he loves learning and he's there and he's just going on and doing his thing. And he's going about his life because, that's what he does. And then someone else who's bigger than him, more powerful than him, and who doesn't see him as an individual, who only sees him as a means to an end, comes in, swoops in, and takes everything away from him. And I think shifting that perspective so we're not seeing ourselves as the human, but seeing what it is to be that victim, the mouse, is really powerful. So I'm excited for this video and excited, for the possibility of opening people's eyes to what it is, that we're doing when we use animals in laboratories.
It's like the power of the animation is it just what you said, all roads lead to empathy. And it brings us into that new dimension where we see life and we see it from that new perspective. And maybe it helps us to do more to end vivisection, to do more to end what's done inside the laboratories. Tell me, Alka, where is this ad running? People can see it at PETA.org, but is it going to be run throughout the country or around the world?
Yes, we're very excited about it. Well, it just launched, I think, yesterday. It's run in New York City. It will be run in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have identified a lot of different markets where there are very large laboratories that use many, many mice. And, in the United States, more than 100 million mice are killed in laboratories every single year. So we're looking at the really big players like the Charles River laboratories. 1 out of every 2 animals in laboratories globally comes from Charles River, and they're based up in Boston. So we're looking at that market. There's Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine, and they also have a massive laboratory in Sacramento. So we're looking at those markets. Jackson Laboratory is one of the world's largest purveyors of genetically modified mice. And, you wonder about these people who, their whole job is to produce, quote unquote, mice who are genetically predisposed to being obese, to having cancer, to having, something that looks like ALS. So, they can't move normally, who are genetically predisposed to, being quadriplegic. That's what they're doing at Jackson Laboratory. So we're looking at that market as well. We also, at PETA, we use the Freedom of Information Act, to find out what's happening at the big universities and the small universities and small colleges, pretty well. We like to have our finger on the pulse of what's happening, across all of the sectors. And so to that end, we see where are the most violations happening of the minimal animal welfare provisions that are afforded to the most vulnerable animals, mice and rats. And so we're looking at the markets where, these things are happening. University of Minnesota, University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Yale University, University of North Carolina, and Chapel Hill. These are the worst of the worst. And, where they have the most horrendous violations, living mice being thrown into the freezer intended for dead animals, mice not being given pain relief when they're used in invasive surgeries or in painful procedures like burn experiments. At one of these places, they, and I don't mean to, be horribly graphic, but, this is just going on. This is what's going on with these animals. There's something called parabiosis where they stitch, lengthwise pairs of mice together. And so they can link, for example, the circulatory system. And it's all very Frankensteinian, but this is happening. And, it happened at University of Pittsburgh, to hundreds of mice. And the mice were not given adequate pain relief, which is just horrifying. So, we're looking at all of these different markets where, basically, we have our focus trained on these places that are particularly bad actors in this field. I mean, all of them obviously are bad actors because they're taking animals and depriving them of, everything that's meaningful to them. But there are those players that are particularly egregious in failing to comply with very minimal provisions for animal welfare. And so we're looking at those markets as well. Anyway, there's this whole plan in place and we're just rolling it out. And we're excited to see how this all impacts our efforts.
That's great because people will be able to see what their neighbors are doing in their communities to harm animals, and maybe they'll speak out, and maybe that can work to help PETA end these vivisection activities and these experimenting activities in those communities. So, and it all comes from a simple little ad, that an animated ad that no one would think it, is, or that people would think is fairly harmless, but it packs a lot of power. So Alka, thank you for talking about this today.
Thank you so much, Emil. It was so nice to chat with you.
Dr. Alka Chanda, PETA VP in the Laboratory Investigations Department. Click on the show notes to see the animation of the Mouse Lab at PETA.org. And that's our program. Hey, you can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's aaldef.org/blog, or on my website, amok.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. Thanks again for listening. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.